Nobody better on a Super Bowl weekend than bringing Fuhrman in here.
BetTheBoardPodcast.com, BetTheBoardPodcast.com. Excellent start there. At Todd Fuhrman on social media. What is up, Fuhrman? How are you today?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. Excited to finally get some of this Super Bowl hype in the rearview mirror and see toe meat leather on Sunday as we've broken down every single possible angle you could think of and then some to try and find a wagering edge for the big game.
I got into props early this morning. I've been looking at them a little bit all week, Fuhrman, but, man, I didn't even get a tenth through today. I don't know how many, what's the biggest number of props you've heard available at one certain book, and then kind of paint the picture for us, because we've all been to Vegas a lot. I've personally never been Super Bowl weekend. I've heard it's incredible, but what is this weekend like compared to other big weekends in Vegas?
So it's always interesting. I think there are a couple of sporting event weekends that are worth coming out to Vegas for that you put on your proverbial bucket list. And the three that I would put up there to do once and maybe not necessarily do again, of course, that opening weekend of March Madness where things tip off with the play-in games on Tuesday and Wednesday, but the real buzz starts Thursday in through Sunday when you have 48 games. It's wall-to-wall action, and now with the schedule being stratified, it gives you an opportunity to stay in action from sunrise to sunset. Super Bowl weekend, while it's just one game, I mean, the energy and some of the parties that are available out here, absolutely tremendous. And then the one that I think is a little bit underrated is actually that Cinco de Mayo weekend where typically you get a big fight, you get the Kentucky Derby, you have the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, and a little bit of Major League Baseball. Plus, you're able to spend quality time at the pool and take in some of those sights and sounds. So those would probably be my top three weekends. In terms of prop offerings, look, Lance, some of these books right now, if you included the index markets, are well north of 1,000 different options, and that includes cross-sport props, every player you could think of, over-under for longest reception for a lot of these players. But I think there was a note that came out this morning from Caesars that really made my head spin about how the space is changing in terms of the overall preferences. One of the folks at Caesars said there were more tickets on Saquon Barkley to score a touchdown in the game than there was on the money line and spread combined.
Wow.
So it just puts things in perspective, how big the prop market is getting and how fantasy-centric things have become in games of this magnitude.
So before we hit some of the props that you like, let's talk about the actual overall point spread. Kansas City this morning, a 1-point favorite over Philadelphia. Is that where you think this will go off? A total, by the way, of 49. Is that where you think this will go off, and what do you see in that?
I think there's a possibility that some books that take some of the larger bets that are out there could trend closer to a pick'em before kickoff. It depends how much emphasis you want to put on this flu bug rumor that's circulating that could be impacting some of the key contributors for the Eagles. But as far as the numbers concerned, I made Philadelphia a very short favorite in the game, less than a point. So it doesn't offer all sorts of opportunity and upside to take the dog plus 1.5. But I have a small bet there, probably the smallest that I'll have on the game, coming in on the side. A much different scenario than if you were talking about making a team a 3-point favorite and having the opportunity to lay 2.5 around those key numbers. The total I haven't gotten to, but I can tell you it's far cry from where we kind of modeled it out. This number was expected to be in that 46.5, 47 range before we saw these teams play in their respective conference championships. Both of those games go flying over the total. This number opens as high as 50.5, and it's no shock whatsoever that we've seen some under money, but I can see multiple scenarios where the game gets loose if one of these teams has to chase, but I am nowhere close to betting this game over the total. It would be under or pass the way the market currently sets.
Easiest bet on the board for me.
Here we go. Get ready, Fuhrman. Write it down.
Brownie, I got my pen and paper out right now. Go ahead. Lay it on me, Dunaway. Let me know how I'm going to make my money.
I've got two. One of them, Harrison Butker over 1.5 field goals made. Easy.
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing you listen to the Bet the Board podcast, so even you can't put the kibosh on that one. Continue.
Oh, you got that one right. Okay, I like that one. My other one is Dallas Goddard over 4.5 receptions.
Well, everybody's going to have that.
Yeah, the Goddard stuff, to LT's point, seems to be the trendiest props that are going on right now. People are looking at how Kansas City has defended or failed to defend the tight end position all season, making a case to go over 4.5 catches and bet him over his yardage numbers. The receptions one I actually like a little bit more, although I don't have either one of them in my portfolio. The yardage one is fascinating because people want to clamor about the X's and O's, but typically for Dallas Goddard, we were looking at his over-under receiving yards props in the low 40s earlier this postseason. season. Now you're being forced to pay a premium. The Butker one, though, we definitely are on ourselves. We went over 1.5, some prices that are a little bit shorter, but still show value the way it's currently being priced. And the main reason behind that is because when you look at this Chiefs offense, they've been able to move the ball up and down the field at a rate we haven't seen from this Chiefs offense since 2018. And even against Vic Fangio, they've been able to show success in 8 prior meetings. The issue for Kansas City is the red zone execution hasn't been there. So if these drives bog down, or even if they're inside, the 40-yard line, Andy Reid not going to be afraid to kick long field goals with Harrison Butker. So I give you that stamp of approval. It was one of the best bets we gave out on the podcast yesterday. I cannot get there with the Dallas Goedert stuff myself.
Okay, Fuhrman, I play to win, but if you like hedging, I think this is kind of a safe bet, and I don't know where these numbers fall right now, but there's going to be so much focus on Travis Kelce, at least from your typical layman out there playing those props. But if you played the over on Xavier Worthy and the over on Hollywood Brown, I think worst case you split, because it seems like Worthy's getting more involved in this offense, and it seems like Hollywood Brown, now back from injury, is getting really involved in the offense.
So the Brown stuff I am on in terms of receptions, not for yardage. I think he can be a high-volume receiver relative to where the market has him priced. We went over 3.5, and I think there's some minus 130s out there now that I would still give the stamp of approval to as well. He has a somewhat favorable matchup because I don't think he's going to be lined up with Quinyon Mitchell from start to finish. And you look at Darius Slay, he's not the same elite cover corner that we've grown accustomed to throughout his career. So as Hollywood gets more involved, the slant routes and some of the short stuff, I think, work right into his favor. The Xavier Worthy side of things, I'm a little bit more skeptical on because Kansas City's strength this year has been getting the ball out of Mahomes' hands at a very quick pace. You look at how many passes he's thrown to the line of scrimmage or behind, and Worthy has kind of been the biggest beneficiary of that, taking the short catch, turning it into a long gain. Problem being is that Philadelphia's defense is amongst the best in the league when it comes to tackling in space. So it's part of the reason that you haven't seen a lot of movement from professional bettors on the over-under for catches or total yards on Worthy. But what you have seen is people looking to bet him under his longest reception at 20.5 yards, thinking that Philadelphia will continue to do what they've done all year, and that's taking away the explosive.
What is the Kelce catch number, reception number? Because I want to bring this up. 3 catches, and he passes Jerry Rice most receptions in Super Bowl history.
Are you serious?
Yeah, 3 catches, and he passes Jerry Rice most receptions in Super Bowl history. So I'd love to know what that number is for Kelce on receptions, Fuhrman, because they're going to make sure he gets that record.
Yeah, 6.5. The rate on Kelce receptions, kind of standard for where you see his over-unders priced throughout the course of the playoffs and given everything that he's been able to do in the past. Now, that prop is taking under money, trying to figure out exactly how prominently Kelce will be featured. I don't think we're going to get a rock-bottom performance like we saw from Kelce last time out against the Buffalo Bills, where they made it a focal point to kind of take him away. But I also don't think we're going to see him go for 117 receiving yards like we did against the Houston Texans with that big explosive. So he's kind of a player that I've steered clear from. Thought we might be able to get a slightly more inflated receiving yardage number. And there's a chance if that price does drift up, there's a prominent book out here hanging a 65.5 that's a little bit off market compared to 61.5 that I may be forced to nibble on closer to kickoff.
Todd Fuhrman with us, bettheboardpodcast.com, at Todd Fuhrman on social media. We'll get a few college basketball questions in a moment. What is a value play for MVP? For those that have not looked, Mahomes, Barkley, and Hurts are your biggest favorites for MVP. Do you have a value play outside of those heavy favorites?
Wish I did, honestly, with these guys. And I think, in all honesty, the 3 guys, if you can get Saquon Barkley, Patrick Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts, I know you have to lay a substantial price at some books. That would be the trio that I would look at. You go down the board and try and figure out the path that a player like an A.J. Brown or a Travis Kelce would need. And I'm not sure I see it there. Maybe on the defensive side if it's a real ugly game. But you can also kind of take advantage of some of the different betting options that are out there via a same-game parlay vehicle. And if you think Saquon Barkley is going to be that guy, maybe you look to bet him, over his rushing yards, over 1.5 touchdowns, and try and find a creative way to manufacture a parlay that's going to pay a little bit more than what's currently being offered in the MVP market. Just don't see, a lot of other guys impacting the game in a major way that I could try and get to a long shot, kind of stealing that hardware.
Yeah, Chris Jones.
Chris Jones, you could get him at plus 5,600 right now if you would like him. That's the top. That's the top defensive player.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, guys, that I think if you're looking at a defensive player, you may as well look to almost try and parlay it with the under in the game, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to have one of those guys very much in the discussion, unless you get a defensive player that has multiple turnovers forced and a couple of touchdowns. But if a George Karlaftis, a Jalen Carter, or a Chris Jones gets there, I think the ceiling for either team's offensive output has to be set at 17 to 20 points.
You mentioned Saquon and all the tickets coming just an anytime touchdown from Saquon. What do you think is the safer play if you do like the under? Like right now it's 114.5, but you can also play his longest rush under 24.5. So would you rather go under the 24.5 or would you go under the 114.5?
And that's actually the market that I did bet myself, under his longest rushes. I think you're going to see this Chiefs team, try and take away the explosive more so than the death by 10,000 paper cuts that the Eagles are going to be more than willing to try and take. So if you look at Steve Spagnuolo in the past, he has been outstanding when it comes to suppressing 100-yard rushers. But Saquon Barkley is a little bit of a different beast. Now, he is working against history. We haven't seen a running back go for the number it would take to cash that prop since Dominic Rhodes back in 2006, and we haven't seen a player go for more than 125 rushing yards since Terrell Davis back in 1997. So I think Saquon over-under in terms of where it's being set in that low 1-teen range. I'd actually lean over, but won't have that on my card. Did, however, go under 24.5, the longest rush. I don't think Kansas City is going to take that boomer bust approach, and wouldn't be surprised at all if they played somewhat lighter boxes and tried to limit Barkley to 6-7 yards on some of the carries and force Philadelphia to move the ball methodically down the field before they kind of squeeze you like a boa constrictor once you get in that green zone.
Go get all the Super Bowl Bet the Board podcast, Bet the Board podcast. Great racing stuff all year long with the Bet the Board family there. To basketball, I am anxious, nervous by nature. Alabama at Arkansas seems to be a bad time to be going to Fayetteville to play. What do you think of the Tide and the Hogs?
Interesting game because all of a sudden it's much more fascinating than what we would have thought about this Arkansas team if we had this discussion last Friday. I think Arkansas right now, we've seen their odds shorten substantially just with winning 3 of their last 4 games against Georgia, Kentucky, and Texas, where they're right around plus 160 to be included in the field of 68. I make Alabama a short favorite here. If you adjust for current form, I think we're going to see Alabama open in that 2.5 range. No strong opinion because I don't like to buy stock at the top of the market on Arkansas. But this is a team, when you look at kind of their upcoming schedule, if they can get a win against Alabama and hold serve against LSU, suddenly we're looking at the Razorbacks through a very different lens than we would have been before they upset Kentucky at Rupp and did so in dominant fashion as nearly a double-digit dog.
Todd Golden has just said at his news conference that Walter Clayton Jr. is playing. I don't know if that affects the line I saw before you came on at mybookie.ag. They had Auburn an 8-point favorite over Florida.
And I think that's probably right where that number needs to be. When you kind of assess Auburn's full body of work, look, I keep waiting for this team to have a letdown, guys, and try and figure out spots where there's opportunity to go against them. And credit to Bruce Pearl and the way he's coached this team up. They've continued to cover after going through a little bit of a lull. I mean, exceeding odds makers' expectations against LSU, Mississippi, and what you would have thought could have been a flat spot against Oklahoma, they go blowing through that number, winning by nearly 30 points in that spot. So I think the number right where it should be in that 8 range. I do anticipate with Clayton, potentially being out there, if you believe Todd Golden, the number could tick down a little bit, and maybe we see it close in that 7.5, 7 range. But to kind of put things in perspective, guys, when you look at how the betting market assesses Alabama and Auburn right now, this may surprise some folks, but I have Auburn more than 5.5 points clear of Alabama at this point, and I think you kind of throw that second tier of SEC teams, your Floridas, your Tennessees, and Alabamas in the same bucket. I think Alabama maybe provides a tougher matchup for Auburn than the others, but Auburn kind of a cut above everybody else in their SEC bucket.
Let me correct myself. They are 9 at mybookie.ag. It was Duke that was 8. You talk about Alabama and Auburn. They play in Tuscaloosa next weekend. We've talked about it on the show. If by chance Clemson upsets Duke, it could be number 1 versus number 2, assuming Alabama can win at Arkansas and Auburn can beat Florida. What kind of odds, Duke favored 8 on the road at Clemson, do you give that a happening?
In terms of Duke going down, Look, I mean, I just don't think that Duke has been tested in the ACC. And while Clemson, you may get a little better effort than what we saw earlier this week, where they weren't able to hang on against Georgia Tech, losing that game as a big-time favorite. So there's a little bit of thought process there that you're kind of buying the dip in Clemson. And I think taking the 8 with the Tigers, especially at home, makes a world of sense in this spot. They can play a frustrating style. And look, I think all of us are trying to figure out how good this Duke team really is. The problem being is that the ACC all of us grew up on isn't quite the gauntlet right now than what it's been in the past. So you try and find that opportunity to fade the Blue Devils. This probably becomes it, because I don't see California, I don't see Stanford, I don't see even the trip going into Charlottesville against Virginia really providing tests. We might not get a good litmus test for where Duke is until they take on Illinois on a neutral in a couple of weeks, because the ACC just hasn't offered any level of resistance whatsoever.
All right, go. I was at Jack State last night, Fuhrman. I don't know if you had action on that game against Middle. But go check out Jerron Pierre. The dude hit 10 threes last night. Kid's a stud.
I mean, I saw some of the updates coming across throughout the course of the game, man. What Pierre have, 25 at the break before he finished with north of 30 in that game?
Yeah. I think he had 25 at the break and finished with 36. 10 threes. I mean, that's insane.
I mean, pretty impressive. He hits 10 threes in a game. Dunaway hits 10 bets all football season. So you try and tell me which is the bigger achievement.
You obviously can't see the monitor because I'm flipping you double birds right now.
Both of them.
This is an all ages show on a Friday morning here, Dunaway. You have to try and restrain yourself a little bit from trying to create those negative adult-like gestures.
Fuhrman, have a great weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl.
Always a pleasure, guys. Best of luck with all your wagers this weekend, and we should all have a celebratory cocktail knowing it's the final football game we'll get for 7+.
Oh, man, don't say that. Thank you, Fuhrman. Be good. That is Todd Fuhrman, bettheboardpodcast.com, bettheboardpodcast.com, and at Todd Fuhrman on social media.